بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So continuing again after a substantial break, and so I think we had reached the discourse of the events of the Bayat al-Aqaba and the subsequent beginning of Hijrah. So I can't remember exactly where we left off. So there's a number of very interesting incidents that took place that we also want to mention, perhaps we didn't mention previously. And so just as a kind of a recap, as if you remember, then after the Am al-Huzn and the very disastrous events of the death of Khadija radiallahu anha and the death of Abu Talib, and then also the rejection in Taif, and Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam is feeling very, of course, frustrated and rejected, and ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down his secure with Isra and Miraj, and also a breakthrough from where no one could have imagined. And as we mentioned earlier, that of course Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, in his efforts of da'wah, one of the most important aspects of, you could say, his expansionist sort of strategy to extend out of Makkah, looking for allies that would support him in somewhere else, because obviously Makkah is not prepared to do so. So I probably mentioned that in Medina, of course, we had the Aus and Khazraj, and we also mentioned about the fact that they were two very strong tribes, but they had been warring from on and off, for quite a large amount of time. They were also allies with the Jewish tribes in Medina. And probably also mentioned that, so they sent their people to Medina Munawwara, to Makkah, to try and get Quraysh to patch things up, to get an alliance, particularly the tribe of Khazraj. However, that was not acceptable to Quraysh, because they realized that that would probably be a political blunder. If they go into alliance with them, it may bring about difficulties from other angles and dimensions. So they decided they wouldn't do so. But Iyas, there was one young man named Iyas who was also in that delegation. Now Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, hearing about this delegation, as was his wont, whenever he found the opportunity, he would take it. So he went to that delegation and said, I can offer you something which is better than what you're looking for. You're looking for someone to patch up, your problems and mediate. So I am the Prophet of Allah, and he mentioned his mission. And however, they were not prepared to listen to anything like that. However, this young Ilyas recognized the truth, and as we mentioned earlier, probably, that the Jews were always, mentioning to the Arabs that, look, you may have the upper hand, but we are the authorities of religion, and we know that our prophet is going to come in the end of time, or later on in the sequence of events, and when he comes, we will be with him and will fight you and destroy you altogether. And they kept on, this is also mentioned in the Quran. So there's an allude to this idea. So now, some of the tribesmen of Aus and Khazraj started to realize this, and actually later on in the pilgrimage, 6 individuals were met by Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam from the tribe of Khazraj. And so when Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, in this juncture during the Hajj, he mentioned that to them, so they recognized that this is most likely that prophet that we've been threatened. So let's beat the Jews to the punch, and let's take the oath with him, and let's join him. So to take this opportunity, by its by its head. And so those 6 Khazrajis, they were by name, they were Asad ibn Zurara, and Auf ibn Harith, Rafi ibn Malik, and Qutbah ibn Amr ibn Hadida, Uqbah ibn Amr ibn Zayd, and Jabir ibn Abdullah ibn Rayab. So these 6 individuals, they took the chance, they went back to Medina, they started their invitation, and they came back with in the next pilgrimage with 12. 10 of them from Khazraj and 2 of them from the tribe of Aus. And so there, Nabi alayhi salatu met them and gave them, gave them invitation, and they accepted Islam. However, Nabi alayhi salatu interestingly, did not make the request that he used to generally make to the tribes. Generally, he would meet the various tribes in Medina, in Makkah, in Mina, and he would ask basically 2 things. Number one, he would extend the invitation to Islam and explain about his prophethood and invite them to Islam, and also tell them, so I'm inviting to Islam and to take me in and be my allies and protect me as you would protect your own people, because that was the tribal custom. If you had that protection, you could, Dawah could continue and your mission could sustain. Otherwise, it would be squashed immediately, as we saw in Makkah. So, however, here, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't mention anything about the protection part, knowing full well that perhaps they're going to accept the da'wah, they're going to go back to Medina, and hopefully the people of Medina will accept this and they will invite him. But he didn't mention anything at that particular point. And he waited until the next year. Now those people went back, they started inviting people to Islam, and then ultimately, as we said, these 12 people gathered, and then they came, and they also, along with them, was sent Musab ibn Umair, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was, as we mentioned, he was that young man in Makkah that was so affluent that wherever he happened to go, people would know that he's passed by that way, because the perfume that he would use, nobody else could afford that. And he, he was the best dressed young man. And now he has left everything, and he is, by accepting the da'wah of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, and he is the same one who was martyred in Uhud, and he had not enough clothing to cover his entire body. When they took his cloth and covered his face, his feet would be showing, and when they covered his feet, and his head would be showing. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave the order that, okay, cover his head with the cloth and cover his feet with the leaves. Idkhar. It's a type of bush that grows wild. So Musab radiallahu ta'ala was sent along with these individuals, and he began his da'wah. Now, there was another interesting aspect, as we mentioned, originally the original 6 were from Khazraj, and then the next 12 that came, who were from, 10 of them were from Khazraj, and 2 of them were from the tribe of Aus. So the Khazraj delegation is obviously much more, and as we know that the Khazraj and the Aus, they were having a conflict. Just recently, the Battle of Bu'ath, which so many of them were killed, and it was an ongoing, and there wasn't a decisive defeat by anyone or a decisive victory by anyone, and so it was an ongoing festering wound. So we have a little bit of an imbalance politically, right? We have all these Khazrajis, and we don't have many from the Aus. So Musab ibn Umair, being a very intelligent young man also, so he plotted his strategies so that he would bring more of Aussies, because we're going to have a political balance here, if we want the things, to settle out. So we're going to have an equal sort of representation. So it so happened that Musab happened to be in the garden of a property of the tribe of Aus, and he was giving dawah to those individuals with the person that he was actually living with, Asad ibn Zurara, who was actually his host in Medina, and he was a Khazraji. But he also had relations with Aus, probably from his mother's side. So he had good connections with Aus as well. And so as Musab was giving the dawah to these Ausi tribesmen, so it came to the attention of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, who was the Sayyid, the chieftain of the Aus, and one of the main individuals one of the probably the most important chieftain of the Aus tribe. So Usayd ibn Hudayr, who also was a very important tribal leader of the Aus. So they happened to be together. So Saad told Usayd, look, go and stop this fellow, from doing what he's doing. He's misguiding our tribesmen. And if it wasn't for the relationship that I have with him from the Aussie side, from his mother's side, then I'd go and tell him that doesn't look good. So you go and talk to him. Tell him, stop it. So he went. So when he came, Mus'ab, being trained by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Udu ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'idati al hasan, wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan." So he came with one face of anger and stop what you're doing. He said, okay, just listen to what I have to say, and if you find it objectionable, stop. If you find it otherwise, then see. So he said that's fair enough. So he very wisely and very calmly and very effectively gave him da'wat, and he accepted. So now he comes back to Sa'ad, and as the Arabs say, يعني رجع بغير الوجه الذي ذهب به. He came back with a different face than he left with. Right? So he left with this angry face, and he came back with an enlightened face of Islam. This fellow they've got him too, This is bad. So he said, okay, you couldn't do it, so I'll have to now do it myself. So now he comes, he brings his spear, and he goes, and the same treatment. He said, okay, fine, listen to what I have to say. If you have an objection, then raise it, otherwise, see you. So he gave his da'wat as well. And the same thing happened, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened up his heart. And so now, this again, similar to Umar, Umar, with the intention of killing the Prophet ﷺ, returned as one of the greatest victories for early Islam. So similarly, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu, so now after accepting Islam, a few minutes previously was the antagonist. Now he goes back to his people, and being the tribal chief that he was, he said, who am I among you? He said, you are our leader, you are our most wise and most knowledgeable. He says, okay, my speech with any of your men or women, or any connection with any of you, is now haram until you all accept Islam. So they said, okay, fine. So they all accepted Islam, and this was a great, opening, of course, obviously. And now this brought more of the Aussies onto the table, So now we're getting a more balance of the Khazrajis as well as Aussies. And of course, keeping in mind that Abdullah ibn Ubay, who was thinking that he was going to be selected as chief, so this is really causing a severe problem for him and his camp, which we'll talk about perhaps later on. In any case, so now, as the Dawah is carrying on and more people of Aus and Khazraj are accepting Islam, and now more important people are accepting Islam, there was a very interesting incident that one of the influential people, because obviously the influential people are wanted to accept Islam, being that obviously a person of influence and sway, just as Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, when he accepted Islam. So it was a big, opening, for the whole tribe. So similarly, other people being targeted, and one of them was Abu ibn Jamuh, who has a very interesting ending in the Ghazwa of Uhud, where he is martyred. But anyway, he was a very important and very influential person. At the same time, he was a mushrik, like most of the Arabs, and it was very interesting that his son, who had accepted Islam, and others from his tribe were keen to see him accept Islam, but he was a very staunch idolater. And he had a special idol made of wood that he used to keep right there in his room. And he would, clean it and, put perfume on it and worship it, and, and like the Arabs would do it. So what happened was his son and some of these youngsters, so they took his idol in the night and threw it out, and threw it out into some hole or into the dirt, to try and get him to think, this idol, what's the use? So he wakes up in the morning, where's my idol? He roams around, he finds it, throw it down, and who could have done this to my idol, and then he takes it back, cleans it up, perfumes it back up again, and the next night, the same thing. And this goes on for a while. Then he says, look, I'm very sorry what they're doing to you, so I think you better start defending yourself. So he took the sword. He took a sword and hung it around his idol's neck and said, okay, since I'm asleep, so you're going to have to defend yourself now, It's very strange, right? So now what they do, they come in the night and take the idol with his sword and tie it to a dead dog, and they throw it into the garbage dump where all the the filthy stuff is. And now he wakes up in the morning looking for his idol and finds the idol and the sword with the dead dog in it. So now his son and the youngsters, the young guys, rebels, as youngsters generally are. So now they think, okay, now he's ready to listen to reason, He said, look, father, there's your idol with the sword hung around his neck, tied to a dead dog in the garbage dump. So, if he can't defend himself, what's the point, They said, can we not tell you something more logical and more reasonable and much more beneficial than that? And so they gave da'wah, and he accepted Islam, Ahmad ibn Jumhur. So obviously he accepted Islam. And now, then ultimately, the next pilgrimage coming, the agreement was that we would have a large delegation, and here the actual official calling of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Medina would take place. Okay, so now, before that took place, Mus'ab ibn Umayyad came back to Makkah, informed Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam of all the events and what's going on, the bayan al-ahwal, if you will. And so now, very interestingly, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam called to his assistant Sayyidina Abbas, his uncle. Now, even though this also tells us about the chivalry and the of the Arabs and this sense of allegiance that they had, with their tribes people and their relatives, and even though he wasn't a Muslim at this point, but he had, of course, much love and respect for his nephew, who was also of a similar age. Even though he was the uncle, but he was, very similar age. So, Nabi Sallallahu took him into confidence and requested him to be with him when they meet this large delegation, which ended up to be 72 individuals from Aus and Khazraj, mostly again Khazrajis and also from Aus, and 2 women also were in that delegation as well. So Abbas radiallahu anhu, accompanying the Rasulullah sallallahu wasalam, opens up the negotiations, and he mentions to them that, look, this is my nephew Muhammad, and he is mu'azzam and mu'azzaz, and he's very highly honored and respected here in Makkah, and we did our best to protect him and assist him as far as we could, even though we weren't under his religion. But still, with the tribal connections and with the tribal customs, we looked after him and protected him, as you can see, with all efforts, and we were succeeded in doing so. Now, if he agrees to go with you to Medina, what are you going to? Are you going to defend him as we did? Are you going to, defend him like you would defend your own mothers and fathers and relatives? And they said, yes, of course. That's why we're here, right? And so there was different dialogues that went on, and then so some of the responsible from Medina realized that this is a very huge undertaking. And one of them said, okay, if we do in fact make a pact with Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so this is going to make enemies with the idolaters who have not accepted Islam yet. It's also going to bring about knowing the jealousy of the Jews. It's going to bring about a problem with our allies from the Jews as well. Now suppose they raise objection and they start fighting with us. So are we going to sacrifice those allies and sacrifice those allegiances and protect this individual? Are we prepared for that? So actually he wasn't objecting, but he was actually opening up, the reality in front of on the negotiation table, if you will. They said, yes, we're ready for that. Right? So ultimately, after back and forth, then Abbas officiating, that pact. And also noteworthy was that pact took place again in Aqaba, as those 12 had met in Aqaba, and the original 6 were also met there, in Mina. So now this was also undertaken in the cloak of the night. It was a secret meeting, but obviously 72 people meeting, it's not going to it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult to conceal that, even though they made their best effort to sneak out of their camps and come in the middle of the night, so that most of them would not realize what's going on. Those who had not accepted Islam by that time, among the people who had come from Medina for Hajj. So then they slipped back into their places. In the meantime, Quraysh got wind that something's going on. People are meeting with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then in the morning they go to the people of Medina. They found out that the people of Medina had met with Muhammad and there's some kind of pact going on, and so they said, okay, what's going on here? So now most of them were not actually involved in it. And among them was Abdullah ibn Ubay. And so they said, we know nothing of that. And the other people kept quiet, of course. And of course they didn't know anything about it. Abdullah ibn Ubay, he says, look, I'm the big shot here, If anything like that would have happened, I would know about it. Nothing like that happened. So they said, okay. They took his word for it. In the meantime, everyone heads back to Medina, and then Quraysh continually, as you remember, they're always, doing everything they can to stop Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his da'wat. So then after their research and after their spying and all that, they come to the conclusion that yes, this has taken place. So they send out a contingent to catch these people and hold them to account. Okay, so among them is Saad is also apprehended by this group of Quraysh, and they take him back and they hold him as prisoner until finally some of his previous allies from Makkah, who he had, looked after their caravans when they used to pass through Medina. Again, the whole tribal custom: who protects who, that is guaranteeing you protection from them. You protect me, I protect you. So it was mentioned that, this individual protects, our caravans. We're going to have to let him go. So that's the maximum the Quraysh were able to do. So everyone had left. They went back to Medina, and now they're preparing, for the oncoming of the Muhajirin from Makkah. And so this turns the whole chapter now. Now the Hijrah begins, and in the next, several weeks, the Muslims, most of them are leaving to Medina Munawwara, and ultimately no one is left in Makkah except those who are totally unable to leave, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr, and Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala. And their hijrat, inshallah, we'll talk about, inshallah, and the next chapter, inshallah ta'ala. Subhanakallah bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.